doing? I'll have you strung up if you've stolen anyone's spheres.
Kaladin turned away from him.
Storm you! I'll have you strung up anyway. Don't think you can run away. There are still sentries.
I'm going to the Honor Chasm.
Gaz shut up. The Honor Chasm. He lowered his metal basket and made no further objections. There was a certain deference given to men who took that road. Kaladin continued to cross the courtyard.
Lordling, leave the sandals and vest. I don't want to have to send someone down to fetch them.
Kaladin pulled the leather vest over his head and dropped it to the ground, then left the sandals in a puddle. That left him in a dirty shirt and stiff brown trousers, both taken off a dead man. Kaladin walked through the storm to the east side of the lumberyard. The pathway down to the shattered plains was familiar to him now. He'd run this way a dozen times with the bridge crews. There wasn't a battle every day, perhaps one in every 2 or 3, and not every bridge crew had to go on every run. But many of the runs were so draining, so horrific, that they left the bridgemen stunned, almost unresponsive for the days between. Many bridgemen had trouble making decisions. The same happened to men who were shocked by battle. Kaladin felt those effects himself. Even deciding to come to the chasm had been difficult. But the bleeding eyes of that unnamed boy haunted him. He wouldn't make himself go through something like that again. He couldn't. He reached the base of the slope, wind-driven rain pelting his face as if trying to shove him back toward the camp. He kept on, walking up to the nearest chasm. The Honor Chasm, the bridgemen called it, for it was the place where they could make the one decision left to them, the honorable decision: death. They weren't natural, these chasms. This one started narrow, but as it ran toward the east, it grew wider and deeper, incredibly quickly. At only 10 feet long, the crack was already wide enough that it would be difficult to jump. A group of 6 rope ladders with wooden rungs hung there, affixed to spikes in the rock, used by bridgemen sent down to salvage from corpses that had fallen into the chasms during bridge runs. Kaladin looked out over the plains. He couldn't see much through the darkness and rain.
No, this place isn't natural.
The land had been broken, and now it broke the people who came to it. Kaladin walked past the ladders, a little farther along the edge of the chasm. Then he sat down, legs over the side, looking down as the rain fell around him, the droplets plunging into the dark depths. To his sides, the more adventurous Kremlings had already left their lairs, scuttling about, feeding on plants that lapped up the rainwater. Liren had once explained that high storm rains were rich with nutrients. Storm wardens in Kalinar and Vedanar had proven that plants given stormwater did better than those given lake or river water. Why was it that scientists were so excited to discover facts that farmers had known for generations and generations? Kaladin watched the drops of water streaking down toward oblivion in the crevasse. Little suicidal jumpers. Thousands upon thousands of them, millions upon millions. Who knew what awaited them in that darkness? You couldn't see it, couldn't know it, until you joined them, leaping off into the void and letting the wind bear you down.
You're right, Father. You can't stop a storm by blowing harder. You can't save men by killing others. We should all become surgeons, every last one of us.
He was rambling, but, oddly, his mind felt clearer now than it had in weeks. Perhaps it was the clarity of perspective. Most men spent their entire lives wondering about the future. Well, his future was empty now. So he turned backward, thinking about his father, about Tian, about decisions. Once, his life had seemed simple. That was before he'd lost his brother, before he'd been betrayed in Amaran's army. Would Kaladin go back to those innocent days if he could? Would he prefer to pretend everything was simple? No. He'd had no easy fall like those drops. He'd earned his scars. He'd bounced off walls, bashed his face and hands. He'd killed innocent men by accident. He'd walked beside those with hearts like blackened coals, adoring them. He'd scrambled and climbed and fallen and stumbled.
And now here I am, at the end of it all.
He understood so much more, but somehow felt no wiser. He climbed to his feet on the lip of that chasm and could feel his father's disappointment looming over him, like the thunderheads above. He put one foot out over the void.
Kaladin!
He froze at the voice. A translucent form bobbed in the air, approaching through the weakening rain. The figure lunged forward, then sank, then surged higher again, like it was bearing something heavy. Kaladin brought his foot back and held out his hand. Syl unceremoniously alighted upon it, shaped like a sky eel clutching something dark in its mouth. She switched to the familiar form of a young woman, dress fluttering around her legs. She held in her hands a narrow, dark green leaf with a point divided in 3. Blackbane.
What is this?
These things are heavy. Oh, I brought it for you.
He took the leaf between 2 fingers. Blackbane. Poison.
Why did you bring this to me?
I thought, well, you kept those other leaves so carefully. Then you lost them when you tried to help that man in the slave cages. I thought it would make you happy to have another one.
Kaladin almost laughed. She had no concept of what she'd done, fetching him a leaf of one of Rosha's most deadly natural poisons because she'd wanted to make him happy. It was ridiculous and sweet.
Everything seemed to go wrong when you lost that leaf. Before that, you fought.
I failed.
She cowered down, kneeling on his palm, misty skirt around her legs, drops of rainwater passing through her and rippling her form.
You don't like it then? I flew so far. I almost forgot myself. But I came back. I came back, Kaladin.
Why? Why do you care?
Because I do. I watched you, you know. Back in that army, you'd always find the young, untrained men and protect them, even though it puts you in danger. I can remember, just barely, but I do.
I failed them. They're dead now.
They would have died more quickly without you. You made it so they had a family in the army. I remember their gratitude. It's what drew me in the first place. You helped them.
No. Everything I touch withers and dies.
Those men in the bridge crew, you could help them.
Too late. It's too late. I failed. They're dead. They're all going to die, and there's no way out.
What is one more try, then? What could it hurt? You can't fail this time, Kaladin. You've said it. They are all going to die anyway.
He thought of Tien and his dead eyes staring upward.
I don't know what you mean most of the time when you speak. My mind is so cloudy. But it seems that if you're worried about hurting people, you shouldn't be afraid to help the bridgemen. What more could you do to them? One more try, Kaladin. Please.
One more try.
The men huddled in the barrack with barely a blanket to call their own, frightened of the storm, frightened of each other, frightened of what the next day would bring.
One more try.
He thought of himself, crying at the death of a boy he hadn't known, a boy he hadn't even tried to help.
One more try.
Kaladin opened his eyes. He was cold and wet, but he felt a tiny, warm candle flame of determination come alight inside him. He clenched his hand, crushing the blackbane leaf inside, then dropped it over the side of the chasm. He lowered the other hand, which had been holding Syl. She zipped up into the air, anxious.
Kaladin?
He stalked away from the chasm. The incline he'd come down was covered with flat, slate-like plants that had opened like books to the rain, ruffled lacy red and green leaves connecting the 2 halves. Life spread. Little green blips of light, brighter than Syl but small as spores, danced among the plants, dodging raindrops. Kaladin strode up, water streaming past him in tiny rivers. At the top, he returned to the bridge yard. It was still empty, save for Gaz, who was tying a ripped tarp back into place. Kaladin had crossed most of the distance to the man before Gaz noticed him. The wiry sergeant scowled.
Too cowardly to go through with it, your lordship? Well, if you think I'm giving back...
Kaladin lunged forward, grabbing Gaz by the neck. Gaz lifted an arm in surprise, but Kaladin batted it away and swept the man's legs out from under him.
The world just changed, Gaz. I died down in that chasm. Now you've got my vengeful spirit to deal with.
Squirming, Gaz looked about frantically for help that wasn't there. Kaladin didn't have trouble holding him down. There was one thing about running bridges. If you survived long enough, it built up the muscles.
We're going to start over new, you and I. Clean. And I want you to understand something from the start. I'm already dead. You can't hurt me. Understand?
Gaz nodded slowly.
Bridge 4 is mine. You can assign us tasks, but I'm bridge leader. The other one died today, so you have to pick a new leader anyway, understand?
Gaz nodded again.
You learn quickly.
Kaladin let the man breathe freely. He stepped back, and Gaz hesitantly got to his feet. There was hatred in his eyes, but it was veiled. He seemed worried about something.